is he here? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Welcome. You have enough time. You can go on how much you want the time.
Sir, I have enough time, but I'm not the author of this paper. Yeah, I'm just presenting this paper. He's not unfortunately here.
You're not
Yeah, yeah.
Ahmad. Then what
No,
is
no.
it?
My name is Bilal Ahmad,
Eh?
and I'm just presenting his paper. Bilal Ahmad.
Bilal Ahmad.
Yeah.
Bilal.
He's not presently here. Some problem is there, and he don't come. And he said, like, on behalf of me, you can present my paper. So, his paper is the two faces of solidarity, Rorty and Gadamer. Richard Rorty and Gadamer, a comparison. So here is his paper. This is first of all Dr. Akil Ahmad, Assistant Professor, Department of Philosophy, AMU Aligarh. So his paper is Gadamer's approach to solidarity bears some resemblance to that of Richard Rorty, and a brief comparison is instructive. Rorty rejects a conception of solidarity based on a recognition of one's another common humanity. Rorty claims universal notions like this are weak and unconvincing, and they are generally not strong enough to prevent cruelty or motivate charity. Instead, our attachments to and concern for others are strongest when they are seen as one of us, where us means something smaller and more local than the human race. Rorty regards this parenconalism as undeniable but not regrettable. In fact, this is precisely the approach to solidarity that he defends, one in which feelings of solidarity are necessarily a matter of which similarities and dissimilarities strike us as silent. Solidarity on these terms has to do with historical contingent identifications, recognition that in this context and at this moment, certain others are part of us by virtue of some shared market or makers. Our solidarity with others rests on the fact that we identify with them. Solidarity as identification is seen most clearly in case of shared national origins, ethnicity, race, religion, where clear identifiers mark us off from others. In characterizing his own approach as ethnocentric, Rorty provocatively calls these solidarities to mind, knowing that they can also be fertile ground of nationalism, racism, and religious bigotry, including violence and injustice to those not part of us. However, the version of ethnocentrism Rorty defines is more inclusively than this. To be ethnocentric is to divide the human race into people to whom one must justify one's beliefs and the others. The first group, one's ethnos, comprises those who share enough of one's beliefs to make fruitful conversation possible. In other words, the solidarities that divide up the world may and often do involve traditions difference like national origins, ethnicity, race or religion, but they need not be limited to these. In fact, part of Rorty's project is to convince that these are less important than similarities with respect to pain and humiliation. In his view, solidarity ought to be based on an understanding that others suffer in the way that we do, an understanding we can encourage through detailed descriptions of particular pains and humiliations. According to Rorty, then we need to actively create a broader sense of solidarity rather than merely recognize those that already exist. Rorty's project is explicitly normative, and although it achieves universal foundations, it has what we might call a universal impulse, in the sense that its orientation is towards an ever expanding community based on the recognition that we suffer similarly. Gadamer shares Rorty's belief that solidarities are historically contingent, not antecedently universal, but he does not view the achievement of solidarity in the same terms. Gadamer thinks that solidarity need to be disclosed through not invented. This difference stems from the fact that Gadamer's conception of solidarity does not rest on identification in the way that Rorty does. For Gadamer, solidarities bind members of political communities together in various ways, but these bonds are not necessarily the result of a recognition that others are like us. For Gadamer, solidarity is connected with practice, which he describes as conducting oneself and acting in solidarity. Briefly, Gadamer understands practice as a way of life that involves using reason to make choices about what is good. In making these choices, we draw on shared norms, convictions, and practices, or as he puts it in Truth and Method, on a sensual communist into which we are thrown and which we accept and revise even as we make our choices. We might say that in general terms, solidarity is the concept Gadamer employs to highlight the fact that these norms and convictions fundamentally bind us to each other in certain common enterprise. When making choices about what is good and right, one does not merely draw on these shared norms and convictions to determine what is right and good for one. Rather, solidarity has to do with the fact that in making such choices, we are inevitably choosing what is right and good for us. What is good for us in certain respects as a town, a community, a state, or a polity, because the process of choosing not only draws on but simultaneously transforms these norms and convictions. Such choices are made in some sense on our collective behalf rather than merely one's own behalf. Gadamer's conception of solidarity might seem indistinguishable from concern from the public good or from the effort to subsume one's private interests in favor of public and shared interests. However, this is not what Gadamer has in mind. Solidarity is more or different than mere public-mindedness. Representing solidarity as a concern for the public good or as a search of mutual interests casts it in terms of that depends too heavily on the conscious intentions of individuals. Public-mindedness requires self-consciousness on the part of citizens and ability to step outside themselves as it were and distinguishes their own interest from the public interest and chooses that later on perhaps sees how they are intervened. It requires, in short, that citizens make their own interests and the interests of others present before them as objective of knowledge. Gadamer's conception of solidarity differs from this in part because his hermeneutical approach denies this picture of knowledge. He criticized the primary of self-consciousness in modern thought along with its restricted understanding of knowledge as making something present as an object of one's consciousness. This is why Gadamer would disagree with Rortyian identification conception of solidarity. Even though Rorty wants to broadly construe the makers that define us, his conception of solidarity remains tied to a recognition of silent similarities and differences that is on somehow making conscious the fact that we share certain characteristics. For Rorty, solidarity is the consequences of identification. It proceeds from knowledge that those included in the us have something in common. This is what allows Rorty to advocate the creation of new, broader forms of solidarity. In contrast, in Gadamer's term, we cannot create solidarity because they are not the consequences of a consciousness of similarities. Instead, the relationship is revised. Solidarities underlie political communities and democratic politics can and ought to help disclose them, bringing them to awareness. Thank you very much.
Tell us about something Rorty and Gadamer.
Yeah, I can try.
You just introduce.
Yeah, you can try. I can try. If anybody have any question, I will try because this is the paper.
I think this is the only thing. You just introduce, then I'll invite the question. Explain about, tell us something about Rorty and Gadamer and their movement.
Rorty's and Gadamer's, I'm not the author of this paper, but I will try. There is the tool in Richard Rorty's that is neo-pragmatic. The approach is neo-pragmatic approach of Richard Rorty. As we know, early pragmatism is based on experience, but while as the neo-pragmatism is based on language, it's a conversational method of Richard Rorty. His interpretation is based on language, and while as the Gadamer's interpretation is based on, that is hermeneutic in nature, and this is the main difference first of all. And the second difference is Rorty's language is pragmatic in the sense he said, like, we must instill hope for the future generations. And he just think, for example, once a person said, Mr. Rorty, does God exist or not? This is how language becomes pragmatic. And Rorty said, he is an atheist person and he don't believe in God, God's existence. And he said, if the belief that God exists is a source of solidarity within my community, then yes, God exists. So this is the power of language. We become pragmatic. And Gadamer's interpretation, that is hermeneutic, that is phenomenological, and whatever we see, and in this sense situational, and his interpretation is situational. While as Richard Rorty's interpretation, that is something which instills hope, which give you say energy, which boosts us for the future consequences. This is the main difference, I think. I'm not the writer of this paper, but I think. So thank you. Anything more? Thank you.
Thank you very much for presenting Rorty and Gadamer's view of philosophy and the concepts involved in it in order to explain just in the section of the history of philosophy. It is nice that we have several papers on Western thought, on explaining the different issues, mind, body, and this one, solidarity, and many others. And fortunately, we don't have the two speakers who has taken up Indian perspective, Bhagavad Gita and this and Lok Sangra. I think Lok Sangra was there. Okay, Lok Sangra was there. Somebody spoke on Lok Sangra? Yes, sir. He is there. Identity, Lok Sangra. So nicely we have covered up Indian and Western history of philosophy. So beautifully the persons, the scholars have presented, and I simply advise them to go a little ahead and make themselves more strong, more better, so that we can. Thank you. But so in order to cover the time, because we have enough time,